Cyril Ward was born in 1912, just months after the Titanic sank and 2 years before the outbreak of the First World War. He grew up at 76 West Terrace, Hucknall, with his parents Ernest and Alice, and older brother Harold. Cyril attended Spring Street School. After leaving, he found work as a hosiery trimmer at Murray Brothers Dyers in Bulwell. Cyril had a natural talent for music, and by the mid-1930s he was a well-known local pianist. He also played the cornet in the British Legion Silver Prize Band and was a proud member of the Levinrac Carnival Band. The Ward family moved to 15 Windmill Grove in the mid-1930s, one of the first council housing developments in Hucknall. In 1938, Cyril married 21-year-old Marion Shepherd, who'd lived at 18 Beardall Street. Like Cyril, Marion worked in the hosiery trade, a machinist at Taylor's. They had met at a Gaiety dance night at the Empire on Vine Street. Two ordinary young people falling in love. But just 2 years into their marriage, war would separate them. Samuel Joseph Scattergood was born in 1917, in the final year of the First World War. His family, father Samuel, mother Alice, and older sister Lillian, had moved from Ilkeston to 78 George Street in Hucknall, after his father secured work at Linby Colliery. A keen footballer, Sam won the Hucknall Rotary Cup and the Bulwell League Knockout Cup with Hucknall Colts FC during the 1936-37 season. In 1939, he married Emily Harvey Kiddie, known affectionately as Pem, at Holy Cross Catholic Church on Collingwood Road. Later that year, they welcomed their first child, Derek, and settled at 104 George Street with Sam's parents. Sam worked as a dyer's labourer at a local yarn house. Their second child, Anne, was born in 1940. Just a month later, in January 1941, Sam was enlisted to join the war effort, leaving his young family behind. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Germany, under Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. This unprovoked aggression prompted Britain and France to declare war on Germany 2 days later.
This is London. You will now hear a statement by the Prime Minister.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
The early phase of the war saw limited fighting in Western Europe, but that changed dramatically in 1940 when Germany launched a rapid and devastating campaign through Belgium, the Netherlands and France, eventually forcing the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk.
An entire British army faced annihilation. But out of the fog and the mist shrouding the channel came a strange armada of navy craft, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, anything that would float. The seagoing people of Britain had come to rescue their army. High overhead, British fighter planes fought the Luftwaffe to a standstill, while below, small Allied suicide units held the Germans back long enough for the miracle of Dunkirk to take place. 211,500 British troops, plus 112,500 French and Belgian, were rescued.
By mid-1940, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, enduring relentless bombing during the Blitz as the threat of invasion loomed. Enlistment in Britain gathered pace. Initially, the British government relied on volunteers and widespread recruitment drives, but as the conflict escalated, conscription became essential. Many young men were called up for military service through the National Service Act, which required all males aged 18 to 41 to join the armed forces. These recruits came from every walk of life, responding to a growing sense of national duty as the country braced itself for a long and uncertain war. Cyril joined the Royal Artillery's 30th Searchlight Regiment 316 Battery as a gunner on 16th of September 1940, while Sam was recruited by the Royal Navy on the 15th of January 1941. Cyril Ward joined his regiment at the 39th Anti-Aircraft Brigade's HQ at Market Raisin Racecourse and would spend almost a year on home territory. The 39th Brigade was tasked with defending Britain's skies, shielding military and civilian targets from Luftwaffe bombers during the Blitz and beyond. In Gainsborough, 316 Battery played a vital role. Their searchlights swept the skies over eastern England, helping to protect the industrial heartlands of Sheffield and Rotherham, both critical for steel and armament production, as these two German intelligence maps show. They also safeguarded the many RAF bases scattered across Lincolnshire, known as Bomber County. By March 1941, the regiment had redeployed to the Humber estuary, strengthening defences around the vital port of Hull and working to deter enemy aircraft from mining the waters. With war looming in the Far East, Prime Minister Winston Churchill grew increasingly concerned about the threat posed by Japan. The naval base at Singapore was a cornerstone of British power in Asia, but dangerously underdefended. In 1941, both 315 and Cyril's 316 Battery were selected for overseas service. Before departure, they moved to Bristol, where they performed firewatching and firefighting duties while awaiting embarkation, part of a last-minute reinforcement effort to bolster Singapore's faltering defences. Meanwhile, Sam Scattergood remained on home ground, beginning his naval career at HMS Collingwood near Portsmouth. HMS Collingwood was one of Britain's most important training establishments, created to prepare wartime recruits for life in the Royal Navy. The conditions were tough. Over 10,000 men trained there in Spartan quarters with limited heating and communal facilities offering very little privacy.
HMS Collingwood near Gosport. That was a land-based barracks for training of seamen. We arrived there. First day was kitting out, drawing your uniform and your stamp to stamp all your kit. But there you did your basic training, 8 weeks solid basic training. And it was intensive, especially when you had to run across the parade ground with full kit and your gas mask on and climb up scrambling nets on the other side. That was that agony. Up at 6, wash, breakfast, and then straight out onto the training grounds, and you didn't miss half an hour. There was no idle time. In that 8 weeks, they had to assess which branch of the Navy you would go into, whether it be into gunnery, engineering, radio, submarine detection. All round the camp were long listen huts, which were your quarters. There's about 20 lads in each hut, and they had to be religiously cleaned every day. I mean, they had to be spotless.
Scattergood completed his basic training in late March, but remained on shore, training in gunnery ready for a posting in the Royal Navy Fleet. By the summer of 1941, Cyril Ward and 316 Battery were preparing to mobilise for the Far East. Tensions with Japan had escalated sharply. Western powers, including Britain and the United States, had imposed crippling sanctions, cutting off vital supplies of oil, rubber and metals. Japan, dependent on those imports, looked south to Malaya and to Singapore, which sat at its southern tip. In late August, 316 Battery travelled to Scotland, embarking on the newly requisitioned troop ship Largs Bay.
I was on several camps. I was at Shirehampton in Bristol. We had a bit of a rough time. We were bunged in to put out the fires and that because there was a lot of bombing out there. That was a transit camp we were in. Then they took us to Southend. We didn't know where we were going or anything like that. And they put us on the Largs Bay, took us to Scotland and put us on the Largs Bay.
They joined convoy WS-11, which formed off the island of Vågsøy on the 31st of August 1941. The convoy was escorted by the battlecruiser Repulse and destroyers Encounter and Nestor. It took a southwesterly route past Ireland and out into the mid-Atlantic before arriving at Freetown, West Africa, on the 13th of September.
One night I was on the machine gun up forward, and the order came round. If anybody fired a shot, one single shot without order, they would be shot. It was a moonlight night. These Focke-Wulf condors came over in the moonlight, and all the ships were racing towards the shadow of the clouds. And as Focke-Wulf condors came overhead, so the last ship seemed to sink in the shadows of the cloud. So they must have missed us by about 15-20 seconds. Everybody with their fingers on the triggers, if they'd let one shot off, could have possibly given our sight away and the whole lot would have been attacked.
There, they waited for the slower section of the convoy to catch up. They left Freetown on the 18th of September, bound for Cape Town, arriving 12 days later. From there, the Largs Bay sailed east to Bombay, reaching India on the 3rd of October, already a month at sea. 5,000 miles away, Sam Scattergood was arriving in Greenock, Scotland. His record shows he was promoted to Acting Layer Rating 3 in gunnery. This entailed aiming the gun for accurate fire, which he had been training for, and earned him an extra 3 pence on his 2 shillings a day pay. Today, this would equate to about £6.50 a day, of which almost half went home to his wife Pem. He wasn't left with a lot, but he did get food, accommodation, uniform, medical care and a pension. Pem, with her 2 small children, would also have been supported by Naval Dependence Allowance, making her total income £1 14 shillings and sixpence, about £100 today. Although less than the £2 a week, or £120 now, that they were used to when Sam was working as a dyer's labourer. Sam joined his ship HMS Chiddingfold as it became ready for acceptance trials on the 16th of October 1941 at Scott's Shipbuilding and Engineering Company based on the River Clyde at Greenock. Cyril Ward's sea voyage continued from Bombay through Colombo and finally onto Singapore, where they arrived on the 6th of November 1941, over 2 months after departing Scotland. A brief period of shore leave was enjoyed, and there was also time to send a Christmas card home.
From your loving husband, Cyril, to my own darling wife, Marion. Hope you enjoy yourself a little at Christmas in spite of my absence. Sig.
As Churchill had feared, world events took a dramatic turn as the Japanese joined the war with a series of deadly raids. Singapore was targeted at 4 a.m. local time on the 8th of December. Cyril and 316 Battery had been transferred to the British base at Nissyo, where they had joined the 5th Searchlights Regiment. Equipped with Bofors guns, they were involved in the defence of airfields against possible Japanese attacks. Their role was vital, lighting up the night sky to expose enemy aircraft to anti-aircraft guns and fighters. But they were still establishing themselves, equipment still in crates and defensive positions only partially prepared. But now the threat was no longer theoretical. 17 Japanese bombers had taken off from Saigon in Vietnam, with a full moon lighting up the sky. They attacked the Tengah and Seletar airfields, as well as Chinatown, Raffles Place and Keppel Harbour, in a 10-minute raid, killing 61 people. In the aftermath of the raid, smoke rose from the direction of the bombed airfields. Rumours swirled that American ships had been sunk, that Japanese troops had landed up the coast, and Hong Kong was under siege. For many, the hope of a quiet posting had vanished. A new front had opened, and they were on it. 90 minutes after the attack on Singapore, the Japanese struck at the heart of America's naval fleet at Hawaii's Pearl Harbor. 353 aircraft raided the naval base, killing 2,403 Americans. 188 aircraft were destroyed and 159 were damaged, with most being caught on the ground in the first wave of attacks, preventing the Americans retaliating in the sky. All 8 of the battleships that were docked were hit, 4 of which sank, including the USS Arizona, killing 1,177 crewmen, almost half of all the fatalities. The very next day, America declared war on Japan, marking its long-awaited entry into the global conflict.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
80% of the world's population now lived in countries at war. 2 days after the first air raid in Singapore, the much heralded British warships HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, which had escorted Cyril Ward and 316 Battery from Scotland, was sunk by the Japanese. For Singapore, war had become a reality. In the weeks that followed, Christmas lights had to be put out, and a blackout regime was observed as only searchlights lit the night sky in search of enemy planes. Back in Britain, Ordinary Seaman Scattergood was aboard the new Hunt-class Type II escort destroyer HMS Chiddingfold as it made its way north to the naval base at Scapa Flow. Scapa Flow is located in the Orkney Islands, north of mainland Scotland, and was the main base of the Royal Navy's home fleet during both World Wars. It was heavily fortified, protected by natural geography, and reinforced with block ships, anti-submarine nets, and gun emplacements. It served as a secure assembly point for warships, convoys, and escort groups defending Britain against German naval threats. Sam was quickly promoted to able seaman, and his first taste of action wasn't far behind. HMS Chiddingfold was preparing to take part in Operation Archery, a daring combined operations raid on the German-occupied Norwegian island of Vågsøy. This operation marked a significant milestone in British military history, being the first major coordinated efforts involving all three armed services, the Royal Navy, the British Army and the Royal Air Force, working in unison under Combined Operations Command. On Christmas Eve, the assault force set sail from Scapa Flow to Sullom Voe in the Shetland Islands. The journey was hampered by atrocious winter weather, with high seas and poor visibility delaying final preparations and forcing the assault force to remain at anchor over Christmas Day.
A souvenir from your sailor man, who sails upon the seas to fight the wars and keep the laws, to keep our empire free.
Despite the challenging conditions, the task force resumed its voyage, and on the 27th of December, Chiddingfold led the group of landing ships into Vågsøy, the inlet leading to Vågsøy. The objective of the raid was to destroy German infrastructure, gather intelligence and boost Norwegian morale, while also diverting German attention away from the Eastern Front. The raid was only partially successful. British commandos inflicted considerable damage. 10 German ships were sunk, key infrastructure was destroyed, and 120 enemy troops were killed, with 98 more taken prisoner. However, the operation came at a cost. 22 British personnel were killed and 8 aircraft were lost. On the return voyage, Chiddingfold and other Royal Navy vessels endured 2 unsuccessful aerial attacks by Hucknall bombers, which were repelled without serious damage. Following the withdrawal of the assault force, HMS Chiddingfold returned to Scapa Flow, having played a key role in what Winston Churchill would later describe as an example of the kind of swift, disruptive raid that would set Europe ablaze. "7,000 miles away, the situation was worsening for gunner Cyril Ward in Singapore. The Japanese air raids continued relentlessly as enemy forces pushed further down the Malayan Peninsula. Allied defences, already stretched thin, were hampered by outdated equipment and poor coordination between searchlight crews, anti-aircraft batteries and night fighter patrols. Communication breakdowns meant searchlights were often activated too late, if at all. As the fighting drew closer, many searchlight personnel, including Cyril, were reassigned to infantry duties for the island's last-ditch stand. Despite orders from Churchill to fight to the last man, and despite outnumbering the Japanese more than 2-1, on 15th of February 1942, 80,000 British, Indian, Australian and local troops laid down their arms. Lieutenant General Percival surrendered, believing it the only way to prevent a massacre of the 1 million civilians trapped in the city.
If one order had been given, advance, which is what we wanted, we could have pushed them off of Singapore. We know that. I think every prisoner of war you've spoken to will be of the same opinion, to tell you that what we wanted the word to go forward, just leadership. The Japs, to fight them, you couldn't see them. They were in the trees. They was around you. We didn't know where they were. They were shooting off these pop guns. The bloke came round the motorbikes and said, well, you've got to pack in, the war's over and that. Major Glossop took us to the top of the hill. He said, well, fellas, the war's over. And after a while, we think, well, what would we do about it now, sort of business. War's over. Everybody was cursing, why can't we go ahead? We've got the men here. And then these little chaps came round the corner. It was real comical. We laughed when we first see them to think the British Army's running away from this lot. And they looked a ragged mess. And they looked so minute and small as they came round the corner. Lieutenant Ducas asked for a volunteer to go. Muggins was a volunteer, and I went down with the white flag. And then the boys started coming down from the hill, and the Japs was absolutely amazed there were so many of them, with their hands in the air as they was told.
Tonight I speak to you at home. I speak to you all under the shadow of a heavy and far-reaching military defeat. It is a British and Imperial defeat. Singapore has fallen. All the Malay Peninsula has been overrun.
Churchill would call the fall of Singapore
the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British military history.
And yet, had Percival chosen to fight on, Cyril Ward would almost certainly have been amongst the dead. It was on this day, 15th of February 1942, that Cyril's military record was marked presumed missing. Able seaman Sam Scattergood and gunner Cyril Ward were now truly wars apart. At Windmill Grove, the months passed in silence for the Ward family. Then, a flicker of hope. In the 24th of September 1942 edition of the Hucknall Dispatch,
more hopeful news is to hand concerning gunner Cyril W. Ward, who was posted as missing at the time of the Jap occupation of Singapore, which Mr. Churchill announced on February 15th. News leaked through that he was well on May 25th, although no official statement of prisoners of war had been made by the Japanese government. The latest phase is that quite a number of people heard his name announced on the German news on Saturday as a prisoner, and accordingly notified his wife and parents at 15 Windmill Grove, Hucknall, of the good tidings. Cyril, who left Hucknall at the beginning of September 1940, was a cornet player of the Levinrack's Carnival Band and the British Legion's Silver Prize Band. For 14 years he was an employee of Messrs. Murray Brothers Dyers of Bulwell. Last week Harold Ward, Cyril's brother, joined the forces. They are the sons of Mr. and Mrs. Ernest Ward.
Marion and the family would now have to wait for official news. Sam Scattergood would serve aboard HMS Chiddingfold throughout 1942 as the Hunt-class destroyer carried out vital escort and air-sea rescue operations in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. On the 22nd of December 1942, Chiddingfold slipped out of Loch Ewe, taking her place amongst the 26 escort ships guarding a convoy of 15 merchant vessels, 2 of which were carrying vital supplies of aviation fuel and oil. They were bound for the distant Kola Inlet in northern Russia, a hazardous run through seas patrolled by German aircraft and U-boats. Chiddingfold arrived at the inlet a week later. 1943 began with further air-sea exercises until June, when Chiddingfold was ordered to Middlesbrough for a refit at Smith's on the south bank of the River Tees. It was during this period ashore that Sam's life briefly intersected with peace, and 9 months later his third child, John Scattergood, was born. By the end of August, the refitted destroyer was back at Scapa Flow. Sam was promoted to temporary acting leading seaman, just as Chiddingfold received fresh orders. She was to join the 59th Destroyer Division for operations in the Mediterranean. From the rugged Scottish coast, she steamed south, escorting a convoy from Vågsøy, pausing at Gibraltar and then pressing on to Malta. Within days, she was back at sea again, guarding another convoy on the return leg to Gibraltar. A constant cycle of duty in the dangerous waters of the Mediterranean War. It was around this time that Marion Ward, Cyril's wife, received a postcard from Thailand. Postmarked 3rd of September 1943, it carried the news his family had feared might never come. Confirmation that Cyril was alive. It had been more than 18 months since his capture in Singapore. For Marion and the family, the relief must have been overwhelming. So many captured soldiers had already perished in the camps. Cyril had been taken prisoner in February 1942 and held first at Changi, the notorious holding point for thousands of Allied prisoner of wars. On the 4th of April, he was packed aboard the hell ship Nissyo Maru, along with 1,100 other prisoners. Conditions were poor, and on arrival 6 days later at Saigon's dock camp, half the men had dysentery. Cyril was assigned to labour duties on the docks, unloading sacks of rice, the very food that would sustain him throughout his captivity. He worked on the docks up to 18 hours a day. Back at the camp, which was infested by mosquitoes, he was provided with just 30 inches of bed space. Discipline was brutal. Recaptured escapees were beheaded and beatings were routine. By grim luck, this assignment spared him the fate of thousands sent to carve the Burma-Thailand railway through jungle and rock, where conditions were brutal and death a constant companion. As many as 16,000 prisoners died on the Death Railway. In June 1943, gunner George Attenborough, another Hucknall man, met Cyril in Saigon. He later recalled how Cyril would play the cornet, lifting spirits amongst the prisoners, with music in a place where hope was scarce. Cyril was still alive, but in the hands of the enemy. His fellow prisoners were dying daily from disease, malnutrition and abuse. With no end to the war in sight, the question remained, how much longer could he survive? In the Mediterranean, Sam Scattergood remained aboard HMS Chiddingfold, carrying out escort duties, refuelling exercises and patrols. By this stage, the war in that theatre was winding down. Italy had surrendered, and the great Allied strongholds of Malta, Gibraltar and Alexandria were all secure. Through 1944, these routine but vital tasks continued, but Sam's long service aboard the destroyer was nearing its end. In October, orders were issued for Chiddingfold to return to Malta for another refit. After almost 4 years at sea, Sam disembarked for the final time on 15th of October at Alexandria. There he was sent to the accommodation and transit camp HMS Sphinx, where he would recuperate for 3 months. In January 1945, he was reassigned to HMS Blenheim, an ageing cruiser turned destroyer depot ship permanently moored at Alexandria. It was while serving aboard Blenheim that Sam heard Winston Churchill's broadcast on the 7th of May, announcing Germany's unconditional surrender.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m., General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea and air forces in Europe. Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight, Tuesday the 8th of May. We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe Day. We must now devote all our strength and resources to the completion of our tasks, both at home and abroad. Advance Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom! God save the King!
For Sam, the war in Europe was finally over. Yet his service was not finished. He remained in Egypt aboard the depot ship until July, when he was transferred once more, this time to duties ashore at Ras El Tin. But while peace had come to Europe and the Mediterranean, the war was far from over elsewhere. In the Far East, the Japanese still held vast swathes of Asia and the Pacific, and for men like Cyril Ward, who had endured over 3 years in captivity at a prisoner of war camp in Saigon, the ordeal continued. Even if he was still alive, he remained a prisoner, waiting for an end that had not yet come. In July, Britain, the United States and China demanded Japan's unconditional surrender or face prompt and utter destruction. Tokyo, ignored the warning. After a test in New Mexico, America's new president, Harry S. Truman, authorized the use of the atomic bomb. Hiroshima was devastated on the 6th, Nagasaki on the 9th. Within days, Japan bowed to the inevitable. On the 15th of August, the world marked VJ Day, victory over Japan. In Southeast Asia, the task of enforcing the surrender and rescuing Allied prisoners fell to the British-led Southeast Asia Command, under Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten. Across the region, Allied forces fanned out to accept Japanese capitulations and recover tens of thousands of men who had endured years in captivity. The formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on the 2nd of September. Liberated prisoners were given urgent medical care before being gathered at staging points such as Rangoon, which became a central hub for repatriation. From there, they were shipped back to Britain, arriving at ports like Southampton, part of a vast operation that eventually returned more than 140,000 Commonwealth servicemen to their homelands. But survival had come at a terrible cost. In Saigon alone, a third of the prisoners never made it out alive.
I have come here today to receive the formal surrender of all the Japanese forces within the Southeast Asia Command. I wish to make this plain. The surrender today is no negotiated surrender. The Japanese are submitting to superior force, now massed here.
For the survivors, including the men of 316 Battery, freedom came at last on the 13th of September, 1,306 days after their surrender at Singapore. After more than 3.5 years of hunger, disease and brutality, they finally stepped out into the sunlight of freedom once more. Amongst the liberated men was gunner Cyril Ward. After more than 3 years in captivity, he had survived, and at last he was free. His health, however, was broken. He was suffering from beriberi, the wasting disease caused by months of eating nothing but rice. He was evacuated by air to Rangoon. From there, he managed to send a brief telegram home.
Arrive safely, British hands, stop. Hope be home soon, stop.
Just 5 days later, he was placed aboard the SS Indrapoera, a Dutch liner pressed into Allied service, which now carried weary men back towards England. For Cyril, every mile brought him closer to home in Hucknall, and to the life he feared he might never see again. With the Suez Canal now open, the shortened trip home took him through Alexandria, where Sam Scattergood was based. The Indrapoera finally steamed into Southampton on Thursday, the 18th of October. Cyril was transported to a reception centre at RAF Cosford near Wolverhampton, where he was given a medical examination, paid and given a new uniform. He also received priority ration allocations of extra meat, fats, sugar and eggs where possible. He was demobilised and given 3 months' leave along with a rail ticket home. His official records note him as repatriated on Friday the 19th of October, almost 6 months after the guns in Europe had fallen silent. On Saturday afternoon, he boarded a train bound for Nottingham and then finally Hucknall.
Having been away for more than 4 years, he was not aware of the patriotic spirit of Windmill Grove, whose people distinguished themselves not only in the victory celebrations, but in the grants constantly made to their representatives in the forces. A telegram on Saturday morning notified his wife and parents that he had reached England from the Far East, and accordingly, neighbours began to set their street in order. So when Gunner Ward appeared on the scene, he found the locality a blaze of colour with flags and bunting and coloured lights.
For Marion, his wife, his parents, and for Hucknall, it was a day of thanksgiving, relief, and celebration. The moment their loved one stepped back into the life they had prayed for since 1942.
The Queen and I bid you a very warm welcome home. Through all the great trials and sufferings which you have undergone at the hands of the Japanese, you and your comrades have been constantly in our thoughts. We know from the accounts we have already received how heavy those sufferings have been. We know also that these have been endured by you with the highest courage. We mourn with you the deaths of so many of your gallant comrades. With all our hearts, we hope that your return from captivity will bring you and your families a full measure of happiness, which you may long enjoy together. George.
The celebrations continued with a party the following weekend.
A happy family reunion party to celebrate the homecoming of Gunner Cyril Ward was held in the Chequers Club Room on Saturday evening. The festivities commenced with a sumptuous tea, which bore glowing testimony to the splendid spirit of cooperation from the neighbours of Windmill Grove. The ladies of this district were in evidence as helpers at the 3 tables, at each of which were seated 30 guests. Dancing followed to the tunes of Mr. Sisson's recording outfit until 7-year-old Joyce Shepherd, Cyril's niece, took the floor. Her first turn was an acrobatic dance, the second a tap dance, and the third ballet. They were all accomplished in fine style and fully deserved the applause they received. Later, she once more showed her entertaining ability when she took the microphone. Amongst those present was George Attenborough, who was captured by the Japs along with Cyril.
Sam Scattergood remained at Ras El Tin until December. By then, both the Admiralty and the government were under mounting pressure to bring servicemen home before Christmas. The French liner SS Pasteur, carrying liberated prisoner of wars from the Far East, was passing through Suez. Sam was selected for passage back to Britain on board, and the ship docked at Southampton on the 17th of December. The following day, his name was entered onto the books of HMS Victory, before he finally returned home to George Street, Hucknall, to meet his youngest son John for the first time, and to celebrate Christmas in peace with his wife Pem and their other children Derek and Anne. That same Christmas, joy was also found in the Ward household at Windmill Grove, with the news that Cyril's wife Marion was expecting a child. Cyril was placed on the Army's Z Reserve on the 7th of April 1946. This meant he could be recalled in the event of another war, but no longer drew Army pay, leaving him free to seek civilian work. He briefly joined Rolls-Royce in Hucknall, before returning to his old trade in hosiery and dyeing at Weldon and Wilkinson's of Basford. Sam Scattergood was formally released from the Royal Navy just a week later, on the 13th of April. After demobilisation, he too went to work at Rolls-Royce in Hucknall, in the Time Office. It is tempting to imagine that during Cyril's brief spell there, it may even have been Sam who checked his clock card. Later that year, just over 9 months after his return, Cyril and Marion welcomed their daughter Diane. A second child, Christine, followed a little over a year later. Yet Cyril's health, weakened by years of malnutrition and abuse in captivity, began to suffer. It would be another 7 years before he was finally discharged from the army as medically unfit. Cyril rarely mentioned his time in captivity, except to say that the Koreans were the worst kind of torturers. Cyril and Sam's paths had already crossed, though neither man realised it at the time. At Greenock, where Sam awaited his posting to HMS Chiddingfold, while Cyril prepared to board the Largs Bay for Singapore. Again, at Alexandria, where Sam was stationed, while Cyril passed through on his long journey home from Japanese captivity, and later, once more, at Rolls-Royce in Hucknall. But their families would eventually be bound together for good. In April 1966, Sam's youngest son John married Cyril's eldest daughter Diane, uniting the two men, at last, as fathers-in-law.